Hey guys, another quick little AI dogfight video, just kind of demonstrating the way that the MiG-19 fights. Obviously the AI is a lot more predictable than an actual player, the conditions are a bit more controlled, yada yada. This isn't meant to be a big show of skill, it's more to demonstrate some concepts. Being the aircraft with a better thrust-to-weight ratio, I decide to begin a bit of a barber's pole here. Instead of going purely vertical, which is what I would more typically do in a lot of aircraft, I kind of go over to the side, just to avoid bleeding off too much speed, and also to make it a little easier to keep eyes on this guy. And if he transitions into a horizontal rate fight, this sets me up pretty good for that as well. And you can see he's pretty distant from me. He's easy enough to see against the sky, but against the ground it's quite hard. Before the MiG-19's flight model revisions, this was probably one of the hardest dogfights to win against the AI, because the AI is so good at energy retention, and the MiG-19 back then was so bad at actually pulling its nose around that you really couldn't keep eyes on the guy. He was just too far away from you. You know, you might be able to outrate him, but he would just be too far away. It's much better now. I can stay much closer to him. I can keep my eyes on him much more readily. You can see here I'm trying to hold about 7 or 8 G. 7 is my best sustained at this altitude. 8 is a pretty good trade-off. It's as much as the ARU will actually allow me to pull. That's the aircraft's kind of limit that it doesn't want to go past. So I'm kind of alternating between sustaining and kind of tightening down and constricting on these turns. Now I could have gone for a bit more of a high aspect shot there if I pulled the nose, but I would have bled a lot of speed to do it, and it just isn't worth the trade-off. I found that the way to beat F5s in the 19 is just to be patient, particularly when you come into the situation neutral or have the advantage. When you're defensive, it's a little more, you know, difficult. But when you hold the cards, you can pretty much dictate the fight to them, as I'm doing here. So rather than risk an overshoot, or try and transition into a horizontal fight, what I do here is I just get above him. He can't come up here. Like, he doesn't have the power. You know, a player F5 might try and point their nose. The F5 does have the nose authority to get its nose up and take a snapshot at you as you get above it like this, but if he misses, he's just burnt all his energy for nothing. You know, if he tries with guns, he'll probably miss. If he tries with a Sidewinder at that range, it'll never track, it's too close. So this is a pretty good play. This is something I do against F5s in the MiG-19. I don't do it as much in the 21, because quite often in the 21 I'm too low energy to do it, you know, from my bad habit of turning so much. But in the 19, this is really a good thing to be doing. This is also kind of how you fight things like A10s, or if you're playing in the F5, you fight a Su-25 like this, you get above him and stay above him. So here I kind of decided to dive in on him, but I mistimed it a little. I actually ended up nearly in front of his nose here. So I'm trying to recover it by just keeping out of his gun sight and trying to manage my lift vector so that I'll eventually come back around behind him. I can play the vertical all day. The MiG-19 is really, really good at this. But the more he tries to follow me up, the less energy he's going to have. The F5, not only can it not sustain very well, but it also can't regain energy very well. It's a very aerodynamically clean airframe, but it just doesn't have power. It really doesn't have power at all. So once it's loaded up, and you're already fighting the drag off the actual wing, you know, the induced drag from high angle of attack on the wing, you don't have the power to force through it like the MiG-21 can. And so you're kind of out of options. Here I finally worked my way around behind him. You can see how I was trying to put myself in this position for the last minute or two, and rather than wait for a gunshot, I see a chance for an R3S, a little bit of weight turbulence there, and it tracks. So something I discovered quite recently, it came up in discussion about the F4 Phantom in a Discord I'm in. The R3S is not as grossly superior to what it should be as I thought. it's actually the case that the GAR-8, AIM-9B, whichever you want to call it, is really drastically underperforming. And the reason it's doing that is because the missile will not begin maneuvering in DCS until its motor burns out, which takes about 2.2 seconds for an AIM-9B. So that's 2.2 seconds where the missile cannot maneuver. I forget the exact distance it travels in that time space. It's like a kilometer or so, kilometer and a half maybe. That's a pretty reasonable distance. And remember, this isn't before it can really maneuver. This is before it can maneuver at all. The missile will not turn until that time expires. And so, if your target has maneuvered at all themselves, the missile's probably wasted. To kill somebody with an AIM-9B, they have to be basically unaware of your presence. And it turns out, the actual timing restriction on maneuvering to avoid hitting the launching aircraft is 0.5 seconds, which is very similar to what the R3S has. So while the R3S does have a slightly improved seeker and a slightly better engine, being a Soviet improvement upon the AIM-9B, not a direct one-to-one copy as people tend to believe, while there is an advantage there, it's not a huge advantage. And most of that advantage comes from things like slightly better flare rejection and, a slight improvement on garbage is still garbage. And also, a slightly better rocket motor. It has quite a bit more energy behind it. So yeah, maybe one day, if that gets fixed, we could see a lot more interesting fights happening with early Cold War weapon sets. Perhaps guns-only MiG-19s and MiG-21s with the R3S against AIM-9B-equipped F-5s and Crusaders once that comes out. Should be quite interesting, so I'm hoping that gets addressed at some point. I'm not expecting it to be a quick process. Enough documents need to be found that ED can't cast aspersions upon the source. But I am really hoping that happens in the future. It should really open up the early Cold War stuff a lot more. Sort of mid to late Cold War is a bit of a can of worms when it comes to weapons, because Blue have only the AIM-9B, the AIM-9P, the AIM-9P5, and then obviously the Lima, the Mike, whatever. And there's a significant gap between those missiles. The AIM-9B, as it's modeled now, is straight garbage. The AIM-9P and P5 are fucking excellent missiles. They're sorely underappreciated. I find that most of the people that complain about them are people who are expecting everything to behave like a 9X. But on the other hand, Red have the R60, so, sort of late period, they've got this really amazing short-range dogfight missile. But all of their earlier heat-seeking missiles are kind of crap. The R13M and R13M1 don't really have a Blue counterpart at the moment. We would need some sort of mid-series Sidewinders to appear for that. Rear aspect only mid-series Sidewinders. So hopefully that'll happen as well as more modules come out. But I do quite like the idea of an earlier Cold War scenario where the R3S and AIM-9B are the missiles. It would be very interesting, I think. It would certainly force people to learn what good shot parameters look like a lot more than they currently do. Some of us on Red Team on Alpin's server got a bit of practice, because for a while the R3S was the main missile we were using, but that was when the R3S was overperforming a bit in turning performance, so I don't know, maybe it's time to start practicing again. Anyway, having fairly unceremoniously dispatched that F5. I'm just coming in for a landing here. I tend to, even when I do these little dogfight practice missions, I do try and land if I've got time, unless I've got something urgent that needs doing. I will try and fly back to an airfield and land somewhere. Every landing you can get is good practice. It's only another 5 minutes, and considering how long it took me to actually get competent at landing this thing, it's probably a good thing to take it where I can get it. As is usual, I'm going to land the MiG-19 with its speed brakes out. I do wait a little longer than I usually do to deploy them here. But the reason I do this, I think I have covered it previously in videos, is that the MiG-19's throttle response is really, really, really bad. These early turbojets really don't respond to the throttle well. It's even worse in aircraft like the MiG-15 or particularly the F-86. But because I don't have that ability to command maximum thrust quickly, I just ride the air brakes, so I'm running almost at full power anyway, and then if something goes wrong, all I have to do is just retract the brakes. It's much safer than waiting for the engine to spool up, which in these older engines could take anything up to almost half a minute from idle. As is typical with my MiG-19 landings, we get a little bit of float. I'm so used to landing the MiG-21 that I flare a little bit much, and the MiG-19 actually starts climbing again. You can tell I'm used to flying delta-winged aircraft a lot more than conventional winged aircraft. Aerobraking in the MiG-19 is quite easy. Unlike the 21, where it wants to slam its nose down straight away, the 19 will hold its nose off the runway quite happily. And then the parachute's basically a formality. You don't even really need it because this thing can aerobrake so effectively. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I will edit in some of the external camera footage from this fight, probably with no commentary over it, just so you can get a nice, pretty view of what was happening from outside the cockpit. As always, good hunting, and I'll catch you on the next one.